Okay, let's dive right into this. Imagine, for a second, a simple trading company, a business that originally traveled halfway across the world just to buy spices and textiles. Now, imagine that exact same company eventually ruling an entire subcontinent. It honestly sounds like the plot of some wild historical fiction movie, doesn't it? But, it's actually one of the most mind-bending true stories in human history. We're going to look at how a group of everyday merchants, slowly but surely, turned an entire nation into their own personal empire.
So, the big question we really need to answer here is this. How does a corporate entity, whose main job was literally just trading spices, become the ruler of a nation? I mean, you've probably heard the story of the Trojan horse, right? A beautiful gift on the outside, but hiding an entire invading army on the inside. Well, the East India Company was basically the ultimate Trojan horse for India. They showed up looking like harmless businessmen, but their intentions, and honestly, the situation on the ground, completely morphed over time.
Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because the pacing here is just crazy. In 1707, you have the death of Aurangzeb, the last truly powerful Mughal emperor. Then, boom, 1757, the Battle of Plassey. Just 7 years later, the Battle of Buxar in 1764. And by 1765, the company is granted Diwani rights. We are literally talking about a span of just 50 to 60 years where a corporate board realized the Mughal Empire was crumbling, took complete advantage of it, and basically hijacked the entire political system. So let's go back and set the scene. The year is 1707. Aurangzeb dies. Now, he was an incredibly dominant Mughal ruler, and his death didn't just cause a little hiccup, it completely shattered the central authority. Suddenly, the absolute dominance that Delhi had over the subcontinent just evaporated. It created a massive, gaping void in the central administration. And that void is what we call a power vacuum. When the big boss is gone, all the smaller regional powers rush in to grab whatever control they can. It's like a giant puzzle falling apart. The moment Aurangzeb was out of the picture, regional Nawabs and Subadars in places like Bengal, Awadh, and Hyderabad just stopped listening to Delhi. They started acting like independent kings, and the massive, unified empire splintered into dozens of fragile little pieces. Right into the middle of this total chaos steps the East India Company. They sailed over from England, armed with a royal charter granted by Queen Elizabeth I way back in 1600. And this charter was a massive deal. It meant that back in Britain, they had an absolute monopoly. No other British company was legally allowed to trade with the East, meaning India. They had zero domestic competition. And this brilliantly illustrates their core motive: pure, unapologetic profit. They were a strictly mercantile operation. Now, if you're wondering what mercantile means, it's pretty simple. You buy goods incredibly cheap in one location, ship them somewhere else, and sell them for a massive markup. The East India Company wasn't there to conquer. Originally, they just wanted to buy Indian cotton, silk, and spices, take them back to Europe, and get filthy rich. But there was a major catch. Sure, they had a monopoly in England, but they didn't have a monopoly in Europe. When the company got to India, they bumped right into French and Dutch traders who were there to buy the exact same stuff. Basic economics kicks in here, right? You've got soaring demand because everyone wants the same silk and spices, but the supply in India is fixed. So what happens? Prices absolutely skyrocket in India. And as the cost of buying goods went up, the company's profit margins started tanking. This was a massive red alert for their business model. To survive, the company had to pivot, and they pivoted hard. They decided the only way to protect their shrinking profits was to heavily militarize their trade. Suddenly, they weren't just sailing merchant vessels. They were using heavily armed ships. They aggressively pushed out their European rivals, and most importantly, they started building massive fortifications right on Indian soil to protect their warehouses. By 1651, they had set up their first factory on the banks of the Hooghly River in Bengal, and pretty soon they were turning these factories into literal fortresses. I mean, think about it from a local perspective. Let me put it this way. Would you let a foreign vegetable vendor set up shop in your neighborhood and then just casually let him build a military watchtower and station armed guards in your backyard? No way, right? Absolutely not. But that's exactly what was happening to the Nawabs of Bengal. A simple group of foreign merchants was literally building walls and raising private armies inside their sovereign territory. You can clearly see where this is going. We hit a massive friction point in Bengal. It became a direct, head-on collision between corporate greed and local sovereignty. The Nawabs of Bengal were waking up to the fact that this company wasn't just doing business anymore. They were actively undermining the Nawab's authority and threatening the state's entire tax collection system. And to make matters worse, we have to talk about the Farman. A Farman is essentially an official royal decree or order from a monarch. Years earlier, the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb had issued a Farman that gave the East India Company the right to trade in Bengal completely duty-free, no taxes on their official company goods. But, as you might guess, this loophole became the birthplace of some wild corruption.
So the crucial point is that this duty-free perk was strictly meant for official company business. But the company officials, they started totally abusing the Farman to run their own private, personal side hustles without paying a dime in taxes. On top of that, they flat out refused to pay regular local taxes and kept expanding their military forts without any permission. They were systematically draining Bengal's rightful revenue, and the Nawabs were absolutely furious.
Eventually, the tension just snapped. Diplomacy went out the window, and the swords were drawn. In 1757, we get the historic Battle of Plassey. But honestly, it wasn't even a fair fight. British forces under Robert Clive essentially bought off the Nawab's commander, Mir Jafar, winning the battle through sheer betrayal and bribery. And then a few years later, in 1764, came the Battle of Buxar. This one was even more devastating, because the company didn't just defeat Bengal, they crushed the combined armies of Bengal, Awadh, and the actual Mughal emperor all at once. After dominating the battlefield, Robert Clive, the mastermind behind a lot of this, dropped a quote that changed everything. He said, "We must indeed become nabobs ourselves." Basically, we need to become the rulers now. The company realized that propping up weak puppet nabobs wasn't going to cut it anymore. If they wanted to guarantee their profits, they needed to grab total direct political control. And that brings us to the climax of the whole story. Following their crushing defeat at Buxar, the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II was completely helpless. He had zero leverage and no choice but to agree to whatever terms the company demanded. This is the exact moment where the East India Company officially transitions from rogue traders into legitimate, recognized political rulers. In 1765, Shah Alam II handed over the Diwani rights of Bengal to the company. Guys, this is absolutely crucial. The Diwani rights gave the East India Company the absolute, legally sanctioned authority to collect all taxes and revenues from the incredibly wealthy province of Bengal. Just let that sink in. The same corporate merchants who used to literally beg local kings for tax breaks were now the official tax collectors of one of the richest regions in the world. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how drastically the whole economic system flipped. Before 1765, the British had to actually bring over gold and silver from Britain to buy Indian goods. It was a fair trade. But after securing the Diwani rights, they didn't have to bring in a single ounce of gold. They just collected taxes from the Indian people and then used that exact same Indian tax money to buy Indian goods, which they shipped globally for 100% pure profit. Historians call this the drain of wealth. India's vast riches were essentially funneled straight into a corporate bank account. So I want to leave you with this final lingering thought. When a foreign corporation uses your own hard-earned taxes to buy your goods and then uses that profit to fund an army to police you, are they really still just a business? It's a chilling reality. This single corporate takeover completely altered the destiny of a massive subcontinent for the next 200 years. Really think about that scale. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We've got plenty more fascinating history to unpack, so stick around, and until next time, keep learning.